The night the drug lord made his move, the air over the desert highway felt charged, as if the darkness itself sensed a storm coming. He was a man feared by many, known for leaving destruction in his wake and for never answering to anyone. But that night, arrogance pushed him one step too far. He laid hands on the wrong man, a biker whose silence carried more danger than 1,000 threats. A man with a past whispered about in bars and roadside diners. A man who didn't chase trouble, but never ran from it either. And when the drug lord realized who he had crossed, fear settled into his bones like winter frost. It started with a deal gone wrong, or at least that's how the drug lord told it. One missing package, one missing payment, one careless insult thrown in the wrong direction. But those who knew the biker knew he wasn't a man who cared about money. He cared about respect, about loyalty, about the unspoken code that held rough men together in a world that rarely showed mercy. So when that code was broken, something in him shifted. His gaze sharpened, his posture stilled, and the air around him seemed to grow heavier. Those who saw it knew one thing. This wasn't ending with excuses. Rumors spread fast, faster than engines on an open road. Some said the drug lord was running. Others said he was gathering his men. But none of that mattered, because the biker didn't need numbers. He didn't need backup. He didn't need permission. All he needed was truth, and the truth was simple. No one, not even a man who ruled the streets with fear, could disrespect him and walk away untouched. The town felt it too, the way tension crawled through alleys and whispers filled the night. Something was coming, something unstoppable, something earned. The drug lord tried everything. Bribes, threats, negotiations whispered through trembling lips. But fear has a way of stripping power away from even the loudest men. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the hunter. He wasn't the king. He wasn't even safe. He was just a man who made a mistake, a man staring into the eyes of someone who saw right through him. Someone who didn't need weapons or words to strike fear deeper than any gun ever could. And when the final moment came, when the drug lord finally found himself cornered, out of lies, out of men, out of options, he dropped to his knees, begging for a mercy he had never once given to anyone else. Because some men rule through fear, but others, the rare ones, rule through presence alone. And crossing them is the last mistake anyone ever makes. The biker's name was Colt, though most people only ever whispered it. He was the kind of man whose presence spoke louder than violence, whose silence could freeze an entire room. For years, he had kept to himself, riding the highways with a small crew who understood the meaning of loyalty. He never looked for power and never wanted to rule anything, but he protected what was his. And when the drug lord laid a hand on one of his brothers during that botched deal, something ancient and unbreakable stirred inside him. Not anger, not vengeance, something deeper, a promise, a quiet, unspoken vow that the world would be rebalanced. The drug lord, Arlo Vega, had built his empire on intimidation. He believed fear was enough to keep men obedient, but he had never faced someone who wasn't afraid. Colt didn't flinch at threats, didn't respond to warnings, didn't negotiate. Instead, he rode out alone into the desert after sundown, the moon casting a silver sheen over his motorcycle. To anyone watching, he didn't look like a man hunting for trouble. He looked like a storm riding on two wheels, inevitable in its direction and unstoppable in its force. Word traveled quickly through the criminal networks. Vega's men doubled their patrols, terrified of the silent shadow they now expected to see in every corner. They had heard stories, things Cole had done years before, things no one dared retell in full detail. Not because they were unbelievable, but because they were too real, too sharp, too true. Vega told his crew that Colt wouldn't dare come after him directly, that he had resources, connections, protection. But the tremble in his voice betrayed him. Even he knew these walls he'd built were made of paper. The first blow didn't come with bullets or fire. It came with exposure. One by one, Colt dismantled Vega's outer circle. He found the accountant who cooked the books, the courier who transported the shipments, the enforcer who kept the fear alive. But instead of killing them, Colt did something far worse. He liberated them. He confronted each man with their own guilt, their own trapped existence, and offered them a way out. With every confession he extracted, Vega's empire cracked. With every secret revealed, The Kingpin's throne crumbled beneath him. By the fourth confession, Vega knew he wasn't facing a typical enemy. Colt wasn't there to destroy for the sake of destroying. He was unmaking an entire world, piece by piece, word by word, truth by truth. And what terrified Vega most wasn't the biker's strength, but his purpose. Purpose, he realized, is more dangerous than rage. Rage burns out. Purpose endures. One night, Vega's lookout spotted a lone headlight in the distance, slicing through the darkness like a blade. Panic rippled through the compound. Men scrambled to their posts, clutching rifles with trembling fingers. Vega barked orders, but his fear infected every syllable, turning commands into pleas. They had fortified the entire perimeter, floodlights, guards, armored gates, but deep down, every man there knew a simple truth. When someone like Colt was coming for you, walls became meaningless. The real battle was psychological, and they had already lost. But when the motorcycle approached, it didn't breach the gate or fire a shot. It stopped at the edge of the compound, engine humming like a growl beneath the night sky. Colt didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply tossed a leather pouch onto the dirt. Vega's men froze, staring at it as if it were a bomb. When they finally opened it, they found stacks of incriminating documents, shipping routes, financial records, bank accounts, bribes, and names Vega had long buried. Every secret Colt had peeled from Vega's empire now lay exposed under the harsh glare of the floodlights. It was a message, and Vega understood it instantly. Colt wasn't attacking yet. He was giving the drug lord a chance to face him without the illusion of power, without an army, without lies. A chance to confront the truth like a man. But Vega, who had built his life on deception, had never learned how to stand without it. The realization made his breath hitch. Colt wasn't hunting him. Colt was cornering him into revealing who he really was. As the compound buzzed with panic, Vega locked himself in his office, pacing like a trapped animal. He tried calling his suppliers, but none answered. He tried calling his friends, but every line went dead. Power, he realized, was only power when others believed in it. And now no one did. Colt had taken that belief away, stripped Vega of the only thing he had ever relied on. He wasn't a kingpin anymore. He was just a man, a scared, isolated man who knew he was running out of time. Outside, Colt sat calmly on his motorcycle, the desert wind brushing dust across his boots. He didn't need to storm the gates. He didn't need to break the walls. He knew that men like Vega always destroyed themselves once the darkness they built was turned inward. Colt's presence was enough. Silent, heavy, unyielding, like judgment manifest in human form. And as Vega finally realized there was nowhere left to run, the truth became undeniable. He hadn't crossed the wrong biker. He had awakened the one man who could dismantle everything he had ever built. Inside the compound, Vega's fear spread like wildfire. His men, once loyal because they feared him, now looked at each other with uncertainty. The documents Colt delivered weren't just evidence. They were the skeletons Vega had hidden, the truth he had buried beneath years of intimidation. Seeing it laid out so openly made every man there question the foundation of the empire they had served. If the king could bleed, if the king could fall, then what did loyalty even mean? The empire wasn't built on respect. It was built on terror. And terror collapses the moment courage steps into the room. Meanwhile, Colt remained unmoving, his silhouette framed by the glow of Vega's floodlights. Even from a distance, the bikers watching from hidden vantage points could feel the tension. They weren't there to intervene unless absolutely necessary. Colt was handling something far more personal than revenge. This wasn't about bloodshed. It was about justice delivered in the quietest, most devastating way possible. The kind of justice that forces a man to confront himself. Vega's panic grew unbearable. He slammed open the office door and stormed out onto the balcony overlooking his compound. "What do you want?" he screamed into the night, voice cracking under the weight of desperation. Colt didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he tilted his head upward, fixing Vega with a stare so cold it felt like silence sharpening into a blade. That silence was worse than any threat Vega had ever issued. It made him feel exposed, like the entire desert had turned its eyes on him. Finally, Colt stood, the metal of his bike creaking as he swung his leg off. He walked a few steps forward, boots sinking into the sand with measured, deliberate weight. When he spoke, his voice was low, calm, steady. "You touched one of mine," he said, "and you thought that meant nothing." The words moved through the compound like a gust of icy wind. Vega's men exchanged uneasy looks. They had heard Colt speak legends, but the real man was far more terrifying in his restraint. Vega tried to compose himself, puffing out his chest, raising his chin, but there was no conviction behind the act. I didn't know," he stammered. Colt's expression didn't change. "You don't get to use ignorance as an excuse," he replied. "Not after a lifetime of taking what isn't yours." At that moment, Vega understood something he had never grasped. A man like Colt didn't need to make threats. The truth alone was punishment enough. Realizing he couldn't intimidate his way out, Vega attempted another strategy. "We can make a deal," he called out, gripping the balcony railing with white knuckles. "I can pay you." "I can." But Colt raised a hand, and Vega's voice faltered instantly. "I'm not here for money," Colt said. "You can't buy back what you broke." The simplicity of those words struck Vega harder than any fist could. He wasn't used to being unmasked so easily, so effortlessly. But Colt wasn't speaking to a drug lord. He was speaking to a man who had spent his entire life hiding behind violence. Vega backed away from the railing, pacing once more, panic guiding his steps. He realized then that his downfall wasn't coming from bullets or blades. It was coming from truth, from the way Colt had peeled back every lie he'd ever told, every shield he'd ever built. The men below were already whispering among themselves, their fear shifting away from Colt and toward the man who commanded them. The realization was suffocating. He was losing them, and once he lost them, he was nothing. Colt took a few more steps toward the compound's gate, not aggressively, but with a purpose so firm it sent another wave of panic through the crowd. The bikers hidden in the dark watched closely, ready if needed, but trusting that Colt knew exactly what he was doing. He stopped just short of the gate, folding his arms across his chest. "This ends tonight," he said. "Not with violence. With truth." Vega's breath caught in his throat. Truth was the one thing he never knew how to face. Then, Colt reached into his jacket and pulled out another pouch, smaller than the first. He tossed it over the fence, and it landed at Vega's feet. His hands trembling, Vega opened it. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and testimonies from people Vega had ruined over the years. Victims of his extortion, his lies, his cruelty. Each one was a story Colt had unearthed. Each one was a life Vega had shattered without remorse. And now, every one of those truths stared back at him. Vega sank to his knees. For the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of what he had done. Not because he was sorry, regret was foreign to him, but because the facade he had built so carefully was now in ruins. Colt stood tall at the gate, watching him crumble. And in that moment, Vega realized that the true power in the world doesn't come from fear or weapons or empires built on lies. It comes from the man who stands before you and shows you exactly who you are, with no need to raise a hand. For several long seconds, Vega remained frozen on his knees, his breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. The compound around him had fallen into complete silence. His men, the same men who once obeyed his every command, now watched him with expressions that ranged from shock to disappointment to something far more dangerous, recognition. They were seeing him clearly for the first time, stripped of power, stripped of arrogance, stripped of the illusion that had held them captive for years. A man who once inspired fear now radiated nothing but fragility. Colt didn't move toward him. He didn't need to. His presence alone was a verdict. The biker's steady gaze pierced deeper than any cruelty Vega had ever inflicted. It wasn't rage Colt carried. It was clarity. And that clarity forced Vega to confront a truth he had spent his entire life avoiding. Strength wasn't about control. It wasn't about domination. It wasn't about forcing the world to bend to your will. Strength was about the weight a man could carry without losing himself. By that measure, Vega was weaker than he had ever admitted. The compound's guards shifted uneasily. Without orders, without certainty, they hovered between loyalty and self-preservation. Colt could see in their faces the breaking point. These were men who had been trapped under Vega's reign of terror for years. Men who had been manipulated, threatened, or coerced into obedience. Colt had offered them truth, and truth has a way of freeing people from the worst prisons of the mind. One by one, they lowered their weapons, not in surrender to Colt, but in surrender to their own exhaustion. Vega looked up slowly, his eyes swollen with panic. "Please, tell me what you want me to do," he whispered. The words tasted foreign to him, thick with desperation. Colt's jaw tightened. There were no threats he needed to make, no speeches to deliver. Instead, he spoke with the same controlled intensity that had carried him through every step of this journey. "Stand," Colt said. Vega hesitated, trembling as he pushed himself to his feet. "Now tell them the truth." Vega's throat tightened. The truth was more terrifying than any punishment Colt could have inflicted, but something in Colt's unyielding stare made refusal impossible. Vega opened his mouth, voice cracking as he confessed, publicly, painfully, fully, to every crime, every betrayal, every life he had damaged. The walls of the compound echoed with the sound of his unraveling, each word shredding the image he had built of himself. And as his confession grew, something astonishing happened. His men began stepping away from him, not out of fear, out of liberation, out of relief. Colt had broken the cycle with nothing but presence, patience, and purpose. When Vega's confession finally dwindled into a whisper, the desert air felt lighter, as if the night itself had exhaled. The guards no longer looked at Colt as an enemy, nor as a threat. They looked at him the way a drowning man looks at the surface. Vega, shaking and drenched in sweat, clung to the railing, barely able to stand. For the first time, he wasn't a drug lord. He wasn't a ruler. He was simply a man watching everything he had built crumble right in front of him. Colt turned away from him, not out of mercy, but out of finality. The judgment was done. The truth had been spoken. He walked back toward his motorcycle, each step deliberate, each movement a silent signal that this story, this war, was ending exactly the way it was meant to. Vega panicked, stumbling forward. "Wait, you can't just leave," he cried, voice cracking with wild fear. Colt didn't turn. "This isn't about me," he said. "It never was. It's about the people you hurt. Face them, not me." Vega collapsed into the dirt as Colt mounted his bike. The roar of the engine felt like the closing of a chapter. But before he rode off, Colt looked over his shoulder one last time. His voice carried across the compound, steady and precise. "Power built on fear dies the moment fear is gone." It was a simple sentence, but it struck Vega harder than any blow could. Because he knew, in his bones, that Colt was right. His kingdom hadn't been stolen from him. He had never truly owned it. As Colt rode into the desert, Vega's men approached their former leader, slowly, cautiously, but no longer under his command. Some turned their backs on him completely. Others confronted him with their own grievances. But none rose to defend him. His empire had collapsed not because Colt destroyed it, but because Colt revealed what it truly was. And once truth is revealed, there is no going back. Miles away, Colt rode under the pale glow of the moon, the desert wind brushing against his face. The journey wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving strength. It was about restoring balance where injustice had taken root. And as he disappeared into the night, one thing became clear. The drug lord had crossed the wrong man. Not because Colt was violent, but because Colt understood something Vega never did. Power is temporary. Character is permanent. And when you stand against a man whose character is forged in loyalty and silence, you face a force far greater than fear itself. The desert swallowed Colt's silhouette as he rode deeper into the night, leaving behind a compound stripped bare of lies. But the aftermath of his presence lingered like the tremor of a distant storm. Vega remained on the ground long after Colt disappeared from sight, his hands sinking into the dirt as if trying to hold on to something, anything, that could anchor him. But there was nothing left. Not loyalty, not power, not respect, only consequence. And in that heavy silence, the weight of years spent ruling through terror finally settled on his shoulders. His men no longer looked at him with fear. They looked at him with clarity, a clarity Colt had forced upon them. They saw the manipulation, the cruelty, the cowardice hidden behind Vega's reputation. And for the first time, they didn't tremble when he moved. didn't obey when he shouted, didn't lower their eyes in submission. Vega's empire had been built on the illusion that he was untouchable. Colt had shattered that illusion without drawing a drop of blood. As Vega staggered to his feet, he understood that the world he created had turned its back on him. Meanwhile, Colt rode until the floodlights were nothing but fading sparks behind him. He wasn't a man who celebrated victories, nor did he cling to the satisfaction of justice served. His mission wasn't driven by ego. It was driven by the code he lived by. A code maybe only a handful of men understood. In the quiet hum of the engine, he reflected on the brother Vega had hurt, the loyalty that demanded action, and the balance he had restored by revealing truth instead of returning violence with violence. For Colt, the night was just another chapter closed. Back at the compound, Vega tried desperately to reassert control. "You still need me," he shouted to his men, voice echoing off the concrete walls. But no one moved. Some walked away, shaking their heads, exhausted by years of servitude. Others confronted him with the rage they had swallowed for far too long. Vega stumbled backward, the power he once wielded slipping through his fingers like sand. Panic clawed at his throat as he realized he had no idea how to exist in a world where fear didn't bow to him. As dawn crept over the horizon, Vega remained alone in the center of his ruined kingdom. The sun revealed what the night had hidden. A man who had built a fortress of lies, now standing in the wreckage of his own making. It was a poetic downfall, delivered not by fists or guns, but by truth in the quiet, unyielding presence of a biker who refused to let injustice stand. Vega's reign was over, but his reckoning had only just begun. While Vega unraveled, Colt returned to the biker compound, where his brothers had waited through the night. Not with worry, but with trust. They knew Colt. They knew his silence was more effective than a dozen armed men. When he finally arrived, parking his bike in the soft glow of the rising sun, the others didn't bombard him with questions. They didn't need details. They only needed to see the calm in his eyes to know the job was done. Gunnar, the brother Vega had hurt, stepped forward. His ribs were still bruised from the beating he'd taken, but the pain no longer held power over him. When he met Colt's gaze, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, loyalty, and a bond strengthened not by violence, but by the protection that comes from men who live by honor. "You didn't have to do all that," Gunnar murmured. Colt shook his head once. "I did. That was the end of it. No fanfare, no dramatics, just truth." The crew gathered around a fire pit, the warmth cutting through the early morning chill. Colt finally shared what had happened, not with embellishment or pride, but with the same simplicity he brought to all things. He told them about the confessions, the documents, the fear that had finally shifted away from them and back to the man who deserved it. As he spoke, the others listened with awe. Colt had waged a war using nothing but presence, the kind of presence that makes men reveal their own sins. It wasn't revenge. It was a cleansing. Word spread quickly through the biker network. Gangs, loners, and wanderers whispered about what Colt had done, not because he had crushed a drug empire, but because he had dismantled it with honesty. It was rare, almost unheard of, for a man to take down a kingpin without bloodshed. Rarer still to do it in a way that left the man begging for mercy under the weight of his own past. Colt's method became a legend, a reminder that strength rooted in integrity outlasts any force built on fear. By nightfall, the crew prepared for a ride, not in celebration, but in reflection. Vega was no longer their problem. Justice had taken its course, the truth had been laid bare, and the desert had witnessed something extraordinary. As their engines roared to life, Colt led the formation, his bike slicing through the darkness once more. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But one thing was certain: when a man with honor is crossed, the world shifts. And Vega had learned the hard way. Vega's downfall rippled far beyond the reach of his compound. In the days that followed, the community he once terrorized began to breathe differently, as if the air itself had grown lighter. People who had lived in fear for years finally stepped outside without looking over their shoulders. Dealers scattered, corrupt enforcers fled, and the illegal operations Vega had controlled came to a grinding halt. Law enforcement moved in quickly, but the groundwork had already been done. Vega's empire had collapsed from the inside out, leaving only the remnants of a man who once thought himself invincible. Vega himself wandered the empty compound aimlessly, haunted by the confessions he had been forced to speak. Each word echoed in his head, louder in silence than they had been in the open air. He saw the faces of the people he had harmed, faces he had learned to ignore, now staring at him with painful clarity. For the first time in his life, he couldn't hide behind power. He couldn't hide behind men with guns. He couldn't hide behind lies. The truth Colt had exposed clung to him like a shadow he could never outrun. Meanwhile, Colt became a symbol without ever wanting to be one. Townspeople whispered about him with a mix of gratitude and awe. Parents told their sons that real strength wasn't in violence, but in the courage to face injustice without losing yourself. Strangers left notes outside the biker compound, thanking the man who had restored balance to a place swallowed by corruption. But Colt didn't let the attention change him. He remained the same, steady, quiet, focused, a man who lived by action, not admiration. One afternoon, a woman approached Colt while he was tuning his bike. She was trembling, holding a letter in her hands. Her brother had been one of Vega's victims, a young man destroyed by addiction and manipulation. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Colt didn't respond with grand gestures. He simply nodded, acknowledging her pain, honoring her loss. She placed the letter on his workbench and walked away. When Colt opened it later, the words inside weren't about revenge. They were about hope, hope she hadn't felt in years. That night, Colt sat alone under the stars, the desert stretching endlessly before him. He wasn't thinking about Vega. He wasn't thinking about victory. He was thinking about the balance he had restored, about the people who could finally sleep without fear, and about the men who had learned the difference between power and strength. In the vast quiet of the desert, Colt understood something profound. You don't need to roar to change the world. Sometimes, the loudest impact comes from the man who speaks only when it matters, and whose silence speaks even louder. Weeks later, Vega was arrested, not because Colt hunted him, but because Vega's own men turned him in. The truth Colt had exposed spread like wildfire, igniting the courage in those who had once bowed to him. They provided testimonies, evidence, accounts of every crime he had committed. In the courtroom, Vega tried to regain his former swagger, but the weight of his confessions silenced him. Every lie he attempted crumbled under the truth he had already been forced to face. He wasn't feared anymore. He was pitted. And in the end, he begged the judge for the same mercy he had begged Colt for. Colt didn't attend the trial. He didn't need to. His work was done the night Vega was made to face himself. Justice wasn't in the sentence. It was in the transformation, in the revelation, in the collapse of a man who thought he ruled the world. The biker crew moved on, returning to their routines, their rides, their code. But people never forgot Colt's part in it. His name became a quiet legend, the story parents told when teaching their children about honor, the tale bikers passed on to younger riders about what true strength looks like. The highways stretched wide and long, but something had changed in the world Colt rode through. People nodded at him with respect, not because they feared him, but because they understood him. He had done what few men could do, ended a reign of terror without becoming a monster himself. And though he never sought recognition, the gratitude in the eyes of strangers became a compass that guided him more surely than maps or roads. On a warm evening, Colt parked his bike on a cliff overlooking the desert where everything had begun. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in deep shades of gold and crimson. As he watched the horizon, a rare softness passed across his face. He wasn't proud. He wasn't triumphant. He was at peace, the kind of peace that comes from living a life aligned with purpose, integrity, and unwavering loyalty. And as the last light of day disappeared behind the mountains, Colt kick-started his engine, its rumble echoing through the open air. He didn't look back, not at the compound he dismantled, not at the man he humbled, not at the legend he unintentionally became. He simply rode forward, into the night, carrying with him the truth that had defined him all along. When a man stands for what's right with quiet conviction, even the darkest empire will kneel. In the end, Colt's story wasn't about dominance, violence, or revenge. It was about the quiet force of a man who refused to let darkness spread unchecked. His confrontation with Vega revealed something deeper than a simple clash between two powerful figures. It exposed the truth that strength built on fear collapses the moment it's challenged by strength built on honor. Vega's empire didn't fall because Colt struck harder. It fell because Colt stood still, unwavering in a world of men who abandoned their morals long ago. That unwavering presence became the mirror Vega could no longer avoid, the mirror that showed him exactly who he was. As the dust settled, the echoes of their confrontation rippled through the desert and beyond. People who had once trembled under Vega's shadow now walked freely, no longer bound to a tyrant who had thrived on silence and submission. Colt's intervention didn't just strip Vega of power, it restored balance to an entire community. It reminded everyone that even in places dominated by corruption, a single person rooted in integrity can shift the entire landscape. The truth is simple. Fear fades, but respect endures. And Colt embodied that truth until the very end. Colt's brothers never spoke of the night Vega fell, not because they wanted to hide it, but because they understood its gravity. Some victories aren't meant to be celebrated. They're meant to be remembered. They're meant to remind us why certain battles must be fought, even when the world looks the other way. Colt never chased recognition, never wanted his name attached to legends or whispered stories. Yet that's exactly what happened. His actions became a testament to the idea that real power is quiet, patient, and absolute in its purpose. And perhaps the greatest lesson this story leaves behind is that mercy doesn't belong to the powerful, it belongs to the righteous. Vega begged for a mercy he had never given, and Colt offered something far more painful: truth. In doing so, he proved that justice delivered without hatred carries the deepest impact. It transforms. It exposes. It heals. Colt didn't walk away as a hero. He walked away as a reminder that one man's integrity can unravel an entire empire of fear. If Colt's journey resonated with you, if it sparked reflection about loyalty, strength, or the battles we face in silence, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Your voice adds depth to stories like this. And if you want to continue exploring narratives filled with emotion, tension, and powerful lessons, consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment. Your engagement helps bring more stories like this to life, stories that speak to the human heart long after the screen fades to black.